Hi, I'm Calivan. Today we're going to talk about the possibility of a new Warcraft or StarCraft game and a few things that surround that topic. We're going to focus on three questions. Are Blizzard likely to make a sequel? Do they have the ability to make one? And are we really sure we want them to? This video is going to be a bit more involved than my usual output, but I wanted to have a go at something a bit meatier for the holidays, so I hope you find it interesting. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about sequels. Every now and then, someone with a vague connection to Activision Blizzard will drop the tiniest hint about a new StarCraft or Warcraft game. And when I say tiny, I mean something so small that even a homeopath would ask for you to increase the dosage. The last one I remember arrived in July and looked something like this. It's a drunk AMA from Jez Corden. Someone asks, do you think Xbox will have any interest in reviving StarCraft if the deal goes through? Jez replies, Microsoft won't need to revive StarCraft. To give some context, Jez Corden doesn't work for Activision Blizzard. He doesn't even work for Microsoft. Instead, he's the editor of Windows Central, a media organisation that provides news and other related content for Microsoft products. Windows Central is not owned or operated by Microsoft, but instead by a company called Future plc that owns and operates a lot of media brands, including such tech giants as PC Gamer, Tom's Hardware and Marie Claire. However, this vague and distant piece of information is just what the content mills need to get turning, so over the next week we got a deluge of crappy articles claiming that StarCraft 3 was in development. You know the sort, stuff like this one from Essentially Sports, or this one from GameRanks, or maybe this heap of trash from Jinx, this hot mess from Tryhard Guides, or maybe this vapid spew from Agrode. Aragode? Aragot? Anyway, you get the picture. These boilerplate low-effort articles are of course fodder for crappy low-effort YouTube videos, so very predictably they are followed by this sort of thing that you might see pop up on your feed one day. Now this isn't the first time this has happened, and it won't be the last. In the previous year, Blizzard's president popped an image of what looks like a StarCraft t-shirt on Twitter. Of course, there was no further information and no context at all, but again it was enough to generate some zero-effort news coverage just as expected. These articles argue that this photo of what looks like a t-shirt must imply that there's a new game on the horizon. However, I think this photo of a t-shirt probably just implies that it's quite hot in California during August. Who would have thought? Now, Blizzard makes no effort to deny any of these rumours. I'm guessing that they serve them well, keeping interest in their brands high without any of the actual effort of doing any work. The fair and kind thing to do would be to keep your loyal fanbase properly informed, but I guess Blizzard just aren't that sort of organisation. So, let's look at the actual facts. Fact 1. Neither StarCraft 3 or Warcraft 4 have been announced. Fact 2. There has not been a single credible leak that either of these games is in the planning or development stage. It's true that an absence of information doesn't mean it's impossible, but let's try and be realistic about this. The Blizzard division of Activision Blizzard employs around 5,000 people. It's pretty hard to imagine that news of a project of such high interest wouldn't spread like wildfire around an organisation of that size. Sure, everyone would be under an NDA, but that's never stopped news from spreading before. Remember, we live in a world where classified military secrets turn up on the War Thunder forums just to win an argument about a certain tank's turret rotation speed. So it would be pretty wishful thinking to imagine this is all happening behind closed doors without even a whiff of it getting out. Okay, we've looked at what they aren't doing, so let's take a look at the why. Well, I think the most obvious answer is probably the truest, and that is that Activision Blizzard just doesn't need to make a new StarCraft or Warcraft game. Every single year there is a new Call of Duty and a new WoW expansion, both which bring in a staggering amount of revenue. Combine that with the WoW subscription, microtransactions and the profits from Diablo, Overwatch and other games, and you've got a steady revenue stream that you can rely on year after year with very little in the way of risk. As a publicly owned company, Activision Blizzard has one clear objective, and that's to serve their shareholders. Individuals at the company might care about the art and the experience, but that's no longer the purpose of the organisation. This isn't a direct criticism of Blizzard, this is just how publicly owned organisations work. Their number one objective is to maximise shareholder value by generating as much profit as possible. Will the Microsoft acquisition change this? Nobody knows, But it's worth remembering that Microsoft is also a publicly owned company with the same clear objective: enrich the shareholders. None of this totally eliminates the possibility of creativity in art. Organisations are still made up of humans, and sometimes financial incentive and creativity serve the same purpose. But this is a rare thing in huge multinationals, as this sort of thinking normally involves a lot of risk. You might think with a company that big it wouldn't hurt them to try. Sinking a couple of $100 million into a new StarCraft game wouldn't make much of a scratch in their multi-billion annual revenue. However, when you break it down, this isn't quite how these sort of organisations work, because they're not one monolithic entity. Let's explain by looking at a fictional megacorporation, which we'll dub Passivision Hurricane. Passivision consists of 50 different divisions, some big, some small, each one responsible for a different part of the organisation's output. On average, each division earns the company $100 million a year, giving the corporation a total revenue of around $5 billion US. Division 1 is responsible for Space Build, a popular franchise with the fans, and currently its team brings in a truckload of money every year with their existing games, from a mixture of expansions, microtransactions, mobile tie-ins and subscriptions. When planning for the new financial year, Division 1's director has two choices. He can keep supporting the existing games like he did last year, the division will continue to exist and everyone will keep their jobs. Or he can scale back his existing operations for 3 or 4 years and direct his team to develop a new product. If he opts to go ahead with the new project, his division will report a loss for 3 or 4 years, and then if his new product isn't successful, his division will be the one black mark on the budget sheet and probably be closed and its staff either laid off or moved into other divisions. The director of Division 1 likes his job. He likes his team and wants it to continue to exist, so it's no wonder that most of the time the safe option is chosen. So that's publicly owned companies, but on the other end of the spectrum you've got Valve, a company that does what it wants seemingly without rhyme nor reason. Have you ever wondered why instead of making Half-Life 3, a game that would probably have made them $1 billion, Valve instead decided to make Alex, which could only appeal to a very restricted audience because of the VR headset requirement? Have you wondered why they released CS2 when CSGO was already the most popular game on Steam? Maybe you've wondered why they will continue to delay a project again and again until they are happy with it, even to the point where it becomes a meme. It's because Valve is a private company. Valve doesn't have public shareholders to appease. Gabe is the boss and owns more than 50%, which essentially means he does what he wants and answers to no one. I'm not saying one company is better than the other or one company's games are better than the other. I just want to give an example of the difference between privately and publicly owned companies. Anyway, enough of all that corporate guff. Let's get back to Blizzard. It's really important to understand that the Blizzard that created StarCraft and Warcraft doesn't exist anymore. They might have the same logo and the same headquarters, but that's about where the similarities stop. So let's stop talking about the company and start talking about individuals. Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2 had literally hundreds of people working on each, but let's take a look at the ones who feature at the top of the credits. These people aren't the actual production staff, they're not doing the development, but instead they're the key producers and leaders whose vision and direction would really shape the games they worked on. From top left to bottom right, you've got executive producer Michael Mordheim, you've got Frank Pierce, the team lead, you've got Sam, the art director, you've got Robert Pardo and Dustin, the lead designers, Robert McNaughton, the lead technical artist, Chris Sigerty, the producer, and then Nicholas Carpenter, the in-game cinematics art director. And let's take a look at where they are now. Well, Michael left in 2018, Frank, Robert Pardo, Dustin and Chris left in 2019, and Nicholas left in 2016. You'll notice that the only two still employed at the company are the art director and the lead technical artist. I think this is a bit interesting, as it might to some extent explain why Blizzard games still look like Blizzard games at face value. However, without people like Michael Mordheim, Robert Pardo, Dustin Browder, Pierce and Sam, it's hardly the same company. This is totally understandable. Every organisation has a certain level of staff turnover as people move on to new opportunities, decide to take their lives in different directions, or get revealed as being disgusting sex pests. Anyway, the point is this. Blizzard isn't the same company it was 20, 15 or even 10 years ago. It's got different priorities, different staff and a different culture. Since it started making Warcraft games, it's morphed from an independent studio with less than 100 employees that answered to its owners into a massive entity staffed by almost 5,000 people that's responsible to its shareholders. The Blizzard you know and love from the old days just doesn't exist anymore, so it's impossible for that Blizzard to make a sequel. So that's why the next great RTS game probably won't be a Warcraft or StarCraft sequel. So I guess the next question is, could they make one even if they wanted to? It's obvious that they have the resources to physically create something, but whether they could actually make a decent sequel that has any impact is another question entirely. One thing I think we can all agree on is that for a new RTS to have any real effect on the market, it's going to have to innovate a little. The genre has been a little stale of late, and you're not going to shock anyone into really engaging with it unless you find a slightly new way to do things. People still play, watch and compete in Brood War and StarCraft 2, and you won't persuade them to give a new product a shot unless they have a really good reason to. Others have grown disenfranchised with the genre after many years of mediocre releases, and they will only have their passions rekindled if there are good signs of broad community adoption. And therein lies the problem. Success in this area requires innovation, and innovation requires freedom of creativity, risk-taking and out-of-the-box thinking, three concepts that are the antithesis of a large risk-averse corporation. There is some evidence to support this. In a 2013 paper entitled Entrepreneurial Exits and Innovation, the authors examine the levels of innovation between different types of companies. They examine all of the venture capital-backed biotechnology firms founded between 1980 and 2000 and track them yearly through 2006. They then look at the number of patents filed by those companies and the quality of those patents to measure innovation levels. In their conclusion, they state that we find that the innovation quality is highest under private ownership and lowest under public ownership, with acquisition immediate between the two. Moreover, an article on Forbes claims that the larger a business gets, the harder it is for any creativity that does exist to actually make a difference. The author suggests that even when those organisations have whole teams dedicated to delivering innovation, that those teams are so far up in the ivory tower of the organisation that they rarely touch actual customers. I suspect that this means that any innovation we do see is more likely to be in areas that aren't directly beneficial to the end user, such as increased monetisation methods. We can see the inverse of this with someone like Frost Giant, a smaller company who are involving those more representative of their communities in the development cycle. I think it's worth acknowledging that just because a company is large and publicly traded, it doesn't guarantee a lack of creativity and innovation. There are some situations where a particularly engaging, charismatic and enthusiastic leader can push past these limitations in a way that breaks the usual mould. Apple and Steve Jobs are a great example of this, with the iPod and the iPhone completely revolutionising the industry. The iPod wasn't the first portable digital music player, and the iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, so you can argue all day over whether this represents true innovation or evolution, but it's hard to ignore how much things changed as a result of these creations. However, it's also worth noting that large entities are far more open to innovation when the chips are down, and change is the only thing that might reverse their fortunes. When Jobs returned to Apple, it was not in a good state. If your team is already winning, then taking risks is probably the wrong way forward, whereas if you're behind, then rolling the dice can be the only way of catching up. More succinctly put, necessity is the mother of invention. In some ways, I think there are actually quite a few similarities between Blizzard and Apple, especially if you look at the period starting with Steve Jobs' return in '97. Both started off with some decent levels of success in terms of the iMac for Apple and with Warcraft 2 and StarCraft for Blizzard. The iPhone did for Apple what World of Warcraft did for Blizzard, and both companies would be trailblazers for their chosen technologies in the years to come. Just as the iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, World of Warcraft wasn't the first MMORPG. But both of these products built upon earlier technologies, improved every aspect of them and integrated them in a way that brought them from a niche market to a global audience. At this stage of their lifetimes, both companies were trendsetters. They drove the market forward and others followed. Many others tried to copy this success and never quite managed it, as they were always one step behind with the next big thing. Just like Apple of the 2010s, Blizzard was the company that you tried to emulate. However, just like Apple without Steve Jobs, the innovations at Blizzard have stopped. Long gone are the days where they led the industry, with 2014's Hearthstone probably being their last great offering. They didn't invent the trading card game, but in a similar vein to other great creations, they found a way to make it work in a format that was fast, fun and very attractive to a wide audience. Since Hearthstone's release, many others have tried to emulate Blizzard's success, but none have come close to its peak popularity. After Hearthstone, Blizzard stopped leading and instead started following. Overwatch may be fun and popular, but if we're being brutally honest, it's Blizzard's attempt at Team Fortress 2, just as Heroes of the Storm is Blizzard's attempt at recapturing Dota. Diablo 4 had a popular release, but it was hardly a game changer. I certainly didn't feel like I got my money's worth, and everyone I know who was into ARPGs went straight back to Path of Exile after a couple of weeks. Aside from that, all we've had is the usual run of World of Warcraft expansions, some remastered versions of older games and a couple of mobile releases. Now, millions of people play and love these games, so I'm not even going to try and argue that they are bad or unpopular, as that would be a totally untenable position. My point is that they are safe, predictable and easy to monetize. What they aren't is creative, innovative and fresh, and I think those specific qualities are what's needed to make a successful modern RTS. At this point, I'm going to take a quick aside here to talk about RTS. There have been a lot of comments about how RTS is a dead or unpopular genre, and this is primarily the reason why Blizzard have not pursued another Warcraft or StarCraft title. I'm not totally convinced. I think for the most part it's not genres that are popular, it's the games in those genres. Unless you are talking about some real niche products, a great game is a great game, and a great game arriving on the scene will encourage others to release games like it, either because they inspire other companies to produce similar titles, or they convince others that it's the surefire way to make a buck. MMORPGs were mostly a niche experience until World of Warcraft blew the market open, and you can hardly say that Twitch was jammed full of people streaming D&D style CRPGs before Baldur's Gate 3 was released. I think we can say the same thing about the RTS boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. It didn't happen because everyone was suddenly interested in real-time strategy, it happened because CNC, Red Alert and StarCraft were amazing. So, one last question remains, do we actually want Blizzard to release a new RTS? Multiplayer experiences aren't exactly a zero-sum game, but they are some elements of that. A highly anticipated release from a major studio can be a double-edged sword, simultaneously reviving a genre while stifling competition. You can see this effect more clearly with MMOs. World of Warcraft was such an amazing game on its release that it brought the entire genre into the mainstream, but as time goes on its very existence goes some way to hold back the possible successes of potentially better games in the genre. An MMORPG is normally an all-encompassing experience, and unless you've got a lot of free time on your hands, it's difficult to keep up with more than one game at a time. Every time someone contemplates creating a new MMO, they have to ask themselves, how do I compete with WoW? Even if a studio pours its heart and soul into a new game and manages to create something more innovative, engaging and fun, is it even possible to lure enough players away for long enough to make the game an ongoing success? There is a little bit of crossover here with RTS when you're looking at co-op and competitive play. Getting good at these games requires a lot of investment, and a lazy release from Blizzard, such as a rehashed version of StarCraft 2 with a new campaign, could prevent other, better experiences from getting the exposure they require to be successful. Blizzard has some very dedicated die-hard fans. If you've ever seen footage of BlizzCon, you'll know what I mean. Look at them. You pop Sylvanas in a CGI trailer, they start clapping wildly and then rush off to the pre-order queue to start throwing money at you, while openly weeping because they can't understand why some people don't like Overwatch 2. The truth is that, like Apple, Blizzard's hardcore fanbase are so invested in the brand that even the most mediocre of releases will have them jumping up and down like it's the second coming. Blizzard fans will pay $20 for a mount skin or $60 to avoid the hassle of actually playing the game, in the same way that Apple fans will pay $1,000 for a monitor stand. If Blizzard announced StarCraft 3 tomorrow and released it next year, I've got a feeling it would sell 10 million copies on release, bring nothing new to the table and be jammed full of microtransactions. Its very existence would be damaging to other promising projects, be largely forgotten by the general population after a few months, and all of the professional players, streamers and commentators will go back to Brood War again. Am I being pessimistic? Perhaps. It's one of those times where I'd love to be proved wrong. The thought of a fantastic, modern and innovative new StarCraft game that captures both the casual and the competitive scene and brings the genre I love back to the foreground would be a dream come true. So, are we likely to see a new Blizzard RTS? I don't think so. They don't want to make one, they probably don't know how to make one in the way it needs to be made, and because of that, I don't think I want them to even try. Hi there, thanks for sitting through this longer than usual speculation. If you made it to this outro then well done you, I'm impressed by your dedication and stamina. If you enjoyed my uninformed ravings then please leave me a like, and if you want more of this sort of thing then be a good chap and subscribe to my channel.